Shanti Garba is a co-founder of Triratna Earth Sangha, and he's also a Buddhist activist and meditator and lover of life. He's author of The Burning House, a Buddhist response to the climate and ecological emergency. He's a member of the Triratna International Council, a regional order convener, and a member of the Restorative Coordinating Group, non-violent communication trainer and partner to Gesine. They live in Bristol and in the UK, and they offer NVC courses online and in person. And some of you may well have done some of his courses. But today he's going to talk about his book, well, the contents of his book. The title of this talk today is Entering the Burning House, which sounds quite scary. The climate and ecological emergency is Buddhist business, and no one gets to sit this one out. So I'll hand over to Shanti Garba.
Thank you very much, Shantachita. So I'd like to explore two things this morning, two related topics. I'll just switch to gallery view. It's a bit scary just seeing myself large on the screen like that. So I'd like to explore two topics. One is the ethical basis for Buddhist engagement with climate and ecological issues. So the ethical basis and compassion. So those two things, because I thought, well, you know, this thing about it's Buddhist business, this is Buddhist business, but what does that actually mean? Well, it means that there are ethical reasons for engaging with the climate and ecological emergency. From a Buddhist perspective, there are ethical reasons. So I'd like to explore what those are, make those a bit more conscious, a bit more aware of those, you know, a bit more conscious, so that we can actually talk about those in a rational way. Of course, we all feel a sense of sympathy with the natural world in the way that Akapa was exploring yesterday in his session. But I'd like to just explore it in a bit more rational way. And then look at compassion and the nature of compassion. And in a way, the surprising nature of compassion. It's not what you think. That's the funny thing. Compassion is not what you think. You know, you can't develop compassion directly, for instance. That just does not happen. It doesn't work like that. Yeah. So we're going to explore how to develop compassion, how to cultivate compassion. So that's my pitch so I'd like to start with reading a poem, which for me illustrates an ethical response to the climate and ecological emergency. This is, can you see a poem? Can you see environmental ethics and an apology? Yeah, okay. So Bhante, as I know him, or Urgyen Sangharakshita, he didn't give long talks on response to climate and ecological emergency, but he's left us this poem, which I think poems can speak volumes. So I'm going to read this for you. An apology. We live in the age of apologies. Here is an apology that is much more meaningful than many being made today. Humankind owes a profound apology to the birds for having polluted the air through which they fly, to the ape and tiger for having destroyed the forests in which they live, to the deer and bison for ruthlessly hunting them almost to extinction, to the rivers and streams for poisoning them with chemicals, to the earth itself for greedily pillaging its riches of silver and gold, to the ocean for slaughtering the greatest of her children, the whale, for scientific purposes, to the mountain peaks for defiling their virgin snows with our trash, to the moon for rudely invading her sacred space, to the stars for obscuring their brightness with the smoke of our cities, to the sun for not gratefully acknowledging our dependence on his bounty, to the truly great men and women of the past for not honouring their memory as we should, and for not walking in their footsteps. And that's dated July 2009, so there's the last bit there. So maybe just pause for a moment. Let's just pause. We're going to have a meditation a bit later on towards the end of the session, but maybe you would just take a couple of minutes now just to sit and reflect on that poem. And then I'd like to see some responses in the chat, please. So, yeah, so I'll stop the share. So a couple of minutes of reflection, then I'll ring a bell, and then some reflections and responses in the chat, please. So when you're ready, opening your eyes, looking around, taking in the other people on the screen. And I invite comments in the chat, please. Reflections or responses, what comes up for you when you hear this poem? I guess for some of you, you've heard it a number of times, but good. What's coming up this time? So what have we got? Shraddhabar says, heartfelt and prescient. Okay. Prescient means foresight, having foresight, seeing ahead. Ian and Lilia say, apologizing is only meaningful if at the same time you determine to make amends. Yes, and making amends is also part of an apology or expressing regret. Yeah, restoring harm, restoring the impact, or finding a way to restore connection and safety and so on. Yeah. And then what have we got? Vimalanandi, deeply sad. Christine, I feel great sadness at all the destruction caused by humans. Yeah. Yeah, that element of grief, which is a whole topic in itself. Yeah. How grief can be an aspect of compassion. Akasha Devi, so could Triratna unite around now taking the next step of actively adopting a fully animist view and making amends? That's a question. And that reminds me that in the Padlet, one of the items is a couple of talks recent talks by Tridevi on the subject of animism, on the subject of Buddhist animism, if you want to follow up on that. Yeah, so you can find them on the Padlet. I won't show the link at the moment. Sridharaka, an apology is only the start. Yes, well, yes, as we said, making amends or restoring harm is also an aspect, an important aspect. Susan says, I feel the guilt as a sharp pain in my abdomen, even though trying to make amends for decades. Wow. Abhayanatri, no, that's not me doing all this, but that's a wrong view, isn't it? Then I make I and the other. I'm part of the whole world. So a bit ashamed. Wow, shame there. Yeah. Nigel says, I feel it's also important to honor those who have always done their best to resist the tide of pollution and exploitation. We can learn from them. Oh, okay, so that's what I would call mudita, or empathic joy, is when we celebrate and we appreciate people who have acted skillfully. And we can celebrate and appreciate the people who've, like Akupa, like Tejapala, who've been telling us about this for years and years and years. And we kind of wake up to that message at different stages. You know, we sort of suddenly, oh, that means me. Oh, you know, and that happens at different times for different people. Eric, similar thing. Eric says, I apologize also, but it must be the start of some appropriate action on my part. Denise, I'm wondering what form a human being's apology would look like. How can I move from an emotional response to action? So similar. Apology opens dialogue, says Zoe. Okay. Christine, we've lost connection with and objectified the earth as other. And Pia says, I wonder if it might be better to do something now to make things better rather than to think about the past and what's gone wrong. But it's important to not ignore and look away from all the bad things in the past, as long as it doesn't lead to feeling hopeless and overwhelmed. Okay. So future, looking at what can we do now? Yes, we need to keep hold of what can we do now? How can we address things now? Yeah, rather than getting lost in the past. Sue says, I feel sad that we've treated the earth with careless disregard. Apologizing is an important part of the process of waking up and taking action. Okay. And Angie, it's a beautiful poem, but I'd like to add an honoring to the natural world and beings we have adversely affected. And I feel that it needs the addition of a vow to do what we can to heal the damage. Okay, so it needs some kind of action statement. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for those responses. So what comes up for me in now, looking at it and in relation to your responses, is something that Bhante, that Sangharakshita said in an interview about this poem. He said, when we've received benefits, then it's important to acknowledge that we've received benefits. So as Akupa was saying yesterday and the days before, we've received benefits from the earth. We've received the benefit of life and the benefit of the natural world and food and sustenance and so forth. So it's actually highly skillful to acknowledge benefits received. Yeah, it's even an aspect of enlightenment. And the Buddha, after his enlightenment, one of the first things he does after his enlightenment is he turns back and he faces the tree, the Bodhi tree, and he acknowledges his gratitude, the benefits he's received from the tree. The tree has sheltered him during his enlightenment. So it's an enlightened quality. It's a gratitude of acknowledging benefits received. And in the interview, and I'll put that on the Padlet, he talks about this. He talks about gratitude. So I guess what this poem really is about is, for me, or what it speaks to me now is this theme of gratitude, of acknowledging the beauty and the richness of the natural world, and how we're entirely dependent on the natural world and its beings for our survival. So yeah, so I'd like to draw out that theme of gratitude. So I started with this poem because for me it represents an aspect of an ethical response, is to acknowledge our gratitude and to express regret when we've acted against our values or against how we want to be in the world. So regrets or confessions come when we acknowledge that we haven't acted in the way that we want to act, either personally or collectively. So that's the essence of a regret, or confession, or apology. But now I'd like to look directly at, well, what's the basis of environmental ethics? Where does that come from an ethical perspective? Where, why do we have some ethical responsibility towards the natural world? And these can be summarized very briefly. But I'm going to, where am I going to read? I'm going to read this the section in just half a page of my book. Page 56. Let's see if we find it. Here we go. A bit larger. Okay. So I'm just looking at this bit here, and I'll read it out. So we can summarize the Buddhist ethical bases of environmental awareness and action as: 1, rational self-interest. We don't want to foul our own nest. And 2, we want to preserve the possibility of enlightenment. And thirdly, a sense of solidarity or even identity with the natural world. That's what Kupu was talking about yesterday, that sense of solidarity. He used the word kinship, respect and kinship. And finally, fourthly, a spontaneous outpouring of compassionate action for the benefit of all. So this is a more Mahayana sort of bodhisattva kind of impulse, spontaneous outpouring of compassionate action. And this is what David Loy emphasizes in his book, Eco-Dharma, which you haven't read yet. I encourage you to read that book, Eco-Dharma. He argues that engagement with the world's problems is not a distraction from our personal practice, but can become an essential part of it. And I follow that kind of approach in my book. And then here's something about the third one, the sense of solidarity or even identity with the natural world, the next paragraph. The more people realize that the natural world is alive, full of life, that resonates with our own lives and is valuable as life, that's the key part. The more people realize that the natural world is alive, full of life that resonates with our own lives and is valuable as life, the greater our chances of survival as a species and a planet. As humans, we bear a greater responsibility than other species, as we've been responsible for creating the current climate and ecological emergency, and other species don't have the means to save or protect the world. Stop the share. So, I'll summarize those in the chat. I've got a little summary here somewhere. Control C. Editing. So, rational self-interest. We depend on the natural world for our survival. We don't want to foul our own nest. Second one is to preserve the possibility of enlightenment. So there's no planet, no habitable planet. There's going to be no human beings and no possibility of enlightenment. A sense of solidarity with the natural world. So the whole area of empathy or sort of sympathetic sort of resonance with the natural world. And fourthly, a spontaneous outpouring of compassionate action for the benefit of the world. So just take a moment to digest those. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you which of those appeals to you, which of those really speaks to you. Because what I've noticed is that sometimes in my life, one of those has really spoken to me, and then maybe years later, another one has spoken to me much more loudly. So just take a moment to reflect on those and check where your heart is drawn. So this isn't a competition, but I'd like to check, where is your heart drawn? So you can raise your hand more than once. I'll read them out, and if this one speaks to you, perhaps could you raise your hand? Okay, Akasha Devi says, I'd like to add a fifth, the recognition that we're not separate, but actually one unique part of nature. So I would see that as part of number 3, a sense of solidarity with the natural world, that the life resonating with life. Yeah, I wouldn't see that as a separate one, Akasha Devi. Of course, we can have a discussion about that. Okay, so let's have a look. So rational self-interest. We depend on the natural world for our survival. We don't want to foul our own nest. Can I see hands up, please? Who does that one speak to? Okay. To preserve the possibility of enlightenment. Hands up, please, for preserving the possibility of enlightenment. Not so keen on that one. Yeah, not so much enthusiasm for that one. Alyssa's dead keen on that one person. Okay. A sense of solidarity with the natural world. Part of, okay, so yeah, that's broadly Mahayana on this call. Broadly Mahayana in our impulse and our aspirations on this call. Okay. And finally, a spontaneous outpouring of compassionate action for the benefit of all. Hands up for that one. Interesting, isn't it? Just seeing what where the interest is. Yeah. Okay. So what's coming up for you now? Maybe can we go into breakout rooms, Zach? Can we do this in breakout rooms? Maybe give 10 minutes in breakout rooms, just
yeah, of course.
Reflect on this. So groups of 3 or 4 for about, let's say 12 minutes if we're going to have 3 or 4 people. Yeah. And then we'll come back and share our reflections. Welcome back. Welcome back. Now. So to get some feedback and to pool our reflections, share our reflections, could you write in the chat fairly briefly, please, like 1 sentence, maximum 2 sentences, so we get to get some feedback from various different groups. Just the headline, please, rather than the essay version. Ian says, enlightenment is a bit of a luxury at the moment. That's interesting. It depends how we view enlightenment, how we relate to enlightenment. If enlightenment means something like collective awakening to where we are and how to proceed as a human, as a race, well, that could be included, it could be included, yeah. If we think enlightenment is purely like some kind of personal insight that doesn't have any relation to the wider context, well, maybe, yeah. So maybe this is a call to collective awakening. I mean, in a way, I mean, every crisis is also an opportunity, and this presents us with the opportunity for a collective awakening. Apeksha Priya, we were reflecting on the list as a progression from self to other. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, they kind of go from a more sort of Hinayana, sort of Theravadan perspective to a more Mahayana, more sort of universal perspective. That's what I've noticed. And in just for example, in Bhikkhu Analayo's course, Mindfully Facing Climate Change, which I highly recommend if you haven't followed that course already. Really appreciate his contribution. He follows the Theravadan texts, and he gives the first 2, the 1 and 2, rational self-interest and preserving the possibility of enlightenment. He says, well, from a Theravadan perspective, these are the basis of an ethical, Buddhist environmentalism. However, in Triratna, we draw our inspiration from the Mahayana tradition and the Bodhisattva ideal in particular. And so we also have access to 3 and 4, a sense of solidarity with the natural world and a spontaneous outpouring of compassionate action for the benefit of all. So there are different aspects of the Buddhist tradition there. Vidyamani, uneasy with the idea that only humans can save the world. We need to let the regenerative forces of life, of which we're a part, work through us. So that's really a sense of solidarity, a sense of kinship with the natural world. That, yeah, sort of Yeah, it's rather than seeing ourselves as the saviors of something. Yeah. Nigel says not just solidarity with, but being nature. Actually being nature. Yeah. So we're part of the earth. We're part of the earth. The earth is part of us. About nature, my practice is to lessen the division between me and the world, other nature. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. Yeah, to lessen the division or bring more of a sense of unity there. Alyssa, I want to live in the relating mode, relating to whatever, rather than in the possessive mode. Ah, okay. Well, that reminds me of Bhante, that is Sangharakshita's distinction between two modes: the appropriative mode, which is all about possessing, and the appreciative mode. So moving from appropriation to appreciation. Akasha Devi, nature is in us as well as all around us. We're not separate from nature or above it, but radically interconnected with it in complex ways. We need to learn as humans to be humble and respectful, rather than arrogantly assuming we're the species in charge. Okay, so call to recognizing that we're part of nature. We're, rather than somehow in charge of the natural world. Vidyamani, also uneasy with vilifying the whole human race. Many human beings also need an apology. Ah, yeah. Yeah, so kind of bringing some subtlety and distinction into this. Yeah. Okay, so I'd like to focus on number 3, because in a way, just for a few minutes, time-wise, a sense of solidarity with the natural world, a sense of kinship. Kinship was the word that Akupa used. Respect and kinship as aspects of metta. So, yeah. And the reason I'm interested in this one is because I wrote a book on empathy. So I'm very interested in how we can extend our empathy, not just for those close to us or those who are similar to us, which is our natural kind of impulse. I'm interested in how we can extend our empathy and it can become a kind of ethical imagination. How empathy can become ethical imagination. And in Living with Awareness and Reimagining the Buddha, Bhante explores this topic of empathy as moral imagination. And he talks about the universe being alive. The universe is alive. We are active participants in consciousness. We are active participants in consciousness. We're not kind of conscious beings moving around in a dead, inert universe, which is, if you're not careful, is the image you can get from Newtonian physics. It's just like billiard balls bouncing off each other. No life in them. Yeah, they're just dead matter. Yeah. So Bhante even goes so far as to say that it's almost impossible to imagine gaining enlightenment in a universe that's conceived of as dead, as inert, as lifeless. Does anybody know the direct quote from that? I think it's from Living with Awareness. So I've quoted it fairly precisely, but it's if you imagine that universe is dead or inert or lifeless, what he says is it's almost impossible to imagine gaining enlightenment in such a universe. It's that central. You know? Only when we're able to see the universe as alive. Okay. I'll have to look into that. Akasha Dave is looking for appropriating versus appreciative mode. I haven't got one off the top of my head, but I will have a look into that, Akasha Dave. It's a bit like love mode, power mode. He may talk about it in that context. But I remember he talks about he's in Kalimpong, and he sees this beautiful tree, and he's standing there going, "What an amazing, beautiful tree! Just what gorgeous, gorgeous leaves." And his friend next to him says, "Enough firewood there for the winter, for the whole winter." Do you remember that? Yeah. So maybe it's there. I don't know. I'll have a look. Appreciative. So coming back to this thing about seeing the universe as alive. So this is kind of the basis, as it were, for Buddhist animism, or how Buddhism and animism come together. And yeah, as I mentioned, Maitri Devi talks about this on a couple of talks which are in the Padlet, recent National Order Weekend, Area Order Weekend. And also Devan and I had a conversation about Buddhist animism at the conference last autumn, so you might want to follow up on that. And Devan's got some interesting things to say about the Bodhi tree, the Earth Goddess, and the Nagas, who are these kind of mysterious earth spirits, about how Buddhism views nature, or imagines nature or natural forces as being very much alive, very much part of consciousness. Yeah. So you might want to go back and have a look at that. So, and perhaps I'd like to tell the story of Siddhartha. So this is the Buddha to be, comes across a field when he's still a child. This is just before the rose apple tree, or this is part of the rose apple tree incident. He tells the story, he comes across a field that's been ploughed, and what he notices is how the earth has been turned over, and he notices all the little insects and the worms and the life that's been damaged or killed in the process of this field being ploughed. And he feels compassionate grief for the loss of life. And it's interesting, it says, as if his own relatives had died. So this is in the Buddha Charita, the story, the Buddha Charita by Ashwagosha. So the Buddha to be, Siddhartha, sees a ploughed field, and what he sees is all the life that's been disturbed in that process and killed and ended. And he feels a tremendous upsurge of compassionate grief for the loss of life, as if his own relatives had died. And that grief leads him to go and sit under the rose apple tree. And he sits with this grief, and compassion arises in him. Compassion arises in him. So this is a very direct story for how compassion can arrive on the basis of grief. You know, this is our kind of reference, our sort of scriptural reference for how compassion can arise on the basis of grief. And this is Siddhartha as a young man before enlightenment. Compassion arises, and he goes into dhyana. He experiences dhyana. He experiences higher states of consciousness. So I'd like to come back to the quote, page 56 of my book, where I say, the more people realize that the natural world is alive, full of life, that resonates with our own lives and is valuable as life, the greater our chances of survival as a species and a planet. I'll put that in the chat. Vinatri says that we will not have enough time because so many people do not realize that. Of course, wrong view again. I don't know about Vinatri. What I would say, what I'm thinking is, we're just kind of getting to grips with samsara here. We're just actually engaging with samsara here, you know, actually in a more emotional, kind of engaged kind of way. That's all. You know, I wouldn't see it as different from other ages or other times. I don't know. I mean, obviously we're facing an existential threat in the sense of, you know, a threat to the, you know, I was saying to Shantashita in the breakout room, I was saying, well, are we really going to be leaving a less habitable planet to future generations than the one we were born into? Is that really going to happen? We're the generation. Sorry, I don't want to lay it all on you, but it's like, you know, are we going to leave a less habitable planet to future generations? It looks like it. You know, that's how it's going. Yeah, that's a rather painful experience, if you ask me. Yeah, so really, it's just about getting to grips with samsara and acknowledging what's happening, what's going on. Angie says, what comes up for me is, what can I do, set in motion with others that help the broad realization to happen? Okay, yeah, so looking at what can we do about this? Yeah. What can we do about this? I think that's really important, that we. Yeah, it's not just I. What can I do about this? What can we do about this? Because it's a collective, you know, it's something we need to explore and become aware of collectively rather than individually. Alyssa says, I agree, and it is beautiful and wonderful to feel the withlings around me. It is a joy. Yeah. So there's beauty and joy there as well as kind of, you know, horror and grief and so forth, anxiety. Yeah. So now we're getting to grips with the complexity of it all. Yeah, the beauty and the terror. Welcome to my world, or welcome to our world, maybe I could say. Yeah. Christine says, I'm thinking that people have differing capacities for empathy based on their childhood experiences, the structure of their brain, and their willingness to learn to empathize. How do we engage with the powerful people who are acquisitive and unempathic? Okay. Empathy comes from being empathized with. That's the short answer. In children, children learn empathy, they develop the capacity to empathize through being empathized with. Okay. That's how they learn it. They see it modeled in others and they experience it themselves. They have a sense that they've been understood or they've been got in some kind of way. They've been heard in some kind of way. And that stimulates that capacity in them. As adults, we have some other options. We do not just dependent on what happened to us as children. We have some other options, which include things like meditation, therapy, Kalyana Mitras, you'd say spiritual friends, people who can model empathy, who can empathize with us, who can get us, who can understand us. And through reflection, the kind of reflection that we're doing here, the kind of reflection on our place in the world. So that's the short answer, Christine. Empathy comes from being empathized with. So how can we empathize with people who both have power and also have see things in a very different way from us, see things in terms of what they can get out of life? And when I was a teenager, this is not new. When I was a teenager, I cut out a picture. Sorry to ramble a bit, but anyway, this is a colourful story. I cut out a picture from an accountancy magazine. My dad worked as an accountant the whole of his life. And I cut out a picture from the accountancy magazine of Ivan Bursky. Does anybody remember Ivan Bursky? No, okay. Okay, so at that time, he was one of the most famous and wealthy and successful businessmen in the world. He worked on the New York Stock Exchange. And I cut this picture out of him and I stuck it on my wall as a kind of a symbol of everything that I wanted to move away from as I got interested in Buddhism and sort of learned to meditate, a symbol of the horrors of the financial world. Now, at that time, the article was all about how successful he was and how amazingly successful he had been as a businessman. But the picture showed him, and I'm pretty sure this was a setup. The picture showed him in a darkened room, and one side of his face was lit and the other side was completely in darkness. And he looked like demonic. In my eyes, he looked totally demonic, this guy. You know, he looked like a titan, like an angry god from the finance world. And anyway, I stuck that on my wall, and then I went traveling, and I went to India, and I did all the kind of hippie things, and got involved in Buddhism, and learned to meditate, and lived in a community, and started working in a right livelihood business, and all that kind of stuff. And then one day, my mum phoned me up. She said, Chris, because that was my name at that point. You know that picture you've got on your wall? Because it was still there on the wall of my childhood room. She said, you know that picture? It turns out he's the biggest crook in history. He's the biggest financial criminal in history. I said, no. I can't believe it. I said, I was amazed, but also kind of reassured in a certain kind of way. And it turns out he was the biggest arbitrageur in history, which means basically he profited off insider information on the New York Stock Exchange. How can we empathize with somebody who believes, like he did, that the winner is the one with most money when they're dead? At the point when they die, this is what he said, this is what he was famous for. He said, the winner is the person who's got most money at the point of their death. How can we empathize with somebody who believes that? That's their core belief. That's their motivation for their life and everything, all their actions. Now, I'm sure none of this is new to you, but I just want to remind you that we also need to empathize with such people and not see them. In my life, has been a journey of training myself to see the humanity in such a person and not to regard them as an enemy, not to see them as however much I may disagree with their views. And it's great practice. It's really good practice, especially if you come from a family like mine, where my dad spent most of his life, well, the whole of his life, working in the city of London for financial institutions. So, should we have a break? Should we have a break for maybe, how long do you need? Do you need 5 minutes or 10 minutes? Can you show me with your hands? Get quite a few tens are coming up there. So let's come back in 10 minutes at 20 past the hour. So just noticing in the chat a couple of comments that I haven't picked up. Vidyamani, most people can empathize, but it is limited to a circle of us. So people like us or people we have an affinity with. Yeah. How can we widen that circle of empathy? So through practice and training, I would say, Vidyamani, through practice and training, which is what we're doing at the moment. Getting to know other people, getting to know people who are not like us, and learning to acknowledge what's important to them. That doesn't mean we agree with their worldview or the way they're going about leading their lives. That's the key thing. Empathizing does not mean agreeing with their worldview or the way they're going about doing things. So I can empathize with somebody, even if somebody's planning to kill me if they can. I can still acknowledge how they're trying to enrich their life, even if it's at the expense of mine. Yeah? And yeah, just while we're, are we all back? So can you switch your camera on if you're back? So I just would. Thanks. Thank you. Okay. And also just picking up Akasha Davies. Yeah, no, actually that's to me personally, so I won't. Ian and Lilia says, empathize with BJ. I guess that means Boris Johnson. Difficult. Yeah. 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 So just kind of maybe just feel a way into that, what that means. How would you empathize with Boris Johnson? What's important to him? If you choose to empathize, that is. What's important to the Boris then? Just as a little exercise here. What do you sense is important for Boris Johnson? Doesn't mean you agree with his worldview. Doesn't mean you agree with how he's going about achieving it or living his preferred strategies. What can you sense is important to Boris Johnson? This is extending our circle of moral imagination or ethical imagination. Christine says power. That's a kind of poison chalice, though, isn't it, Christine? I mean, it's like we're not really, it's because power has is a derogatory term in this context. I guess he likes to feel a sense of being valued. I remember reading a friend of his who said he just wants everybody to love him. He wants everybody to love him. And that kind of fits, He wants the good opinion of people around him, and he's willing to do whatever he can to achieve that. As it happens, I knew him a bit at university. I went to public speaking classes with Boris Johnson, so I have a little bit more insight into that. What I would say is he likes to be liked. He wants to be liked. He loves to be loved. He wants to be liked. He wants to have the good opinion of people around him. Yeah. So again, Ian and Lilia say only BJ is important to BJ. That's not really empathy, Ian, as you probably appreciate by now. That's more like you're telling me what's important to you, which I guess is perspective, or maybe valuing everybody's needs. Yeah. Yeah. A binary, in the end, he wants to get happy. Same exercise of putting Vladimir Putin in stage 4. Yeah, so we can put him in stage 4 of our meta bhavana. But I think it's really important to kind of try to see these people as human beings, however horrified we are by their behavior. Because if we start seeing them as less than human, well, that's having an impact on us. That's reducing our humanity, our dignity, our capacity for compassion. And that's what I have hope in, our capacity for compassion, for seeing humanity, seeing the humanity of people. Eric says, he, like me, wants to love and be loved. Indeed, he does. I'm sure he does, particularly Boris Johnson. He certainly wants to be seen as a hero of saving the Conservative Party from the Labour government. Yes, yeah, I'd go along with that, Helen. Thinking of first option, says Nigel, is it okay to use someone else's self-interest as a means to encourage them to take action if you can get them to see that they stand to benefit from this? Well, it might work. It works with some people, this appeal to rational self-interest. I'm not sure it works with everybody, but it's one of the bases of Buddhist environmental action, rational self-interest. We don't want to foul our own nest, do we? Yeah. I'm not sure it works with everybody, but it's worth appealing to what I would call enlightened self-interest. Let's put it like that, enlightened self-interest. Okay, so we're really into the thick of it now. So I want to introduce this topic of compassion. And I want to, because compassion is, for me, is really central to all of this. As a quality, it's central because I really like this quote from the 17th Karmapa, Ogyen Trindi Dorje. He says, the single most important factor that will move us to act is to protect the world is compassion. I'll read that again. The single most important factor that will move us to act to protect the world is compassion. So we all have compassion to some extent, and we can develop it further through practice and reflection. I would argue that compassion is the only sustainable fuel for climate activism. Compassion is the only sustainable fuel for climate activism. Everything else will sap our energy. Everything else will drain us, lead to burnout at some point, or just blanking out, just kind of pushing away and blanking out what we're aware of. So what is compassion? Well, I'm sure most of you know this, it's when metta, or loving kindness, comes into contact with suffering. So when metta, so imagine this kind of amoeba blob of metta comes along and comes into contact with suffering, then it transforms into karuna, or compassion. So karuna is a metaful response to anyone or anything that's suffering. And karuna moves us to care and to act. To care and to act, both are important, both the aspects of compassion. The caring and the impulse to reduce suffering, to act. Okay, now Eric says, Analio suggests that empathy can lead to burnout, whereas compassion does not. Here we disagree, I'm afraid. Analio seemed to have a different understanding of empathy from the one I have. And I have actually written to him about this and talked to him. And I sent him I sent him both my books, the one on empathy, I'll meet you there, and The Burning House. And I'm waiting to see what happens. To see if, because clearly we have a difference of understanding here about what empathy is. So that's in progress, ethics. Sorry, that's in progress, Eric. That conversation. So compassion is not about taking on the suffering of another. It's not about taking on other people's suffering. So that's a kind of common understanding of compassion, is that you take on other people's suffering. What happens if you take on other people's suffering? Almost immediately, you get totally overwhelmed. Yeah. So I'm not recommending that you take on other people's suffering. That for me is a recipe, immediate recipe for burnout. If you try to take on other people's suffering, that's what I would call sympathy or identification rather than empathy. That's the modern psychological understanding or definition of the difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is when you identify with another person's suffering, you try to feel what they're feeling or elicit the same feelings in you as a way of creating connection. And this leads to distress. If you try to take on other people's suffering, it leads to distress. And distress blocks empathy. Okay, so this is the modern psychological understanding coming from psychological studies about empathy. Distress blocks empathy. Okay, so if you're feeling distress, it's very unlikely you will be able to experience any kind of empathy for anybody else, because you're preoccupied, your attention is taken up with your own suffering, with your distress. So distress is self-referential from a Buddhist perspective. It's not other regarding. Distress is self-regarding, because it's almost impossible to empathize with others when you're feeling distress. So if we're feeling distress, we need to do some self-empathy, some self-compassion for our distress before anything else, because we're not going anywhere with empathy or compassion. If we're feeling distress, we need to do some self-empathy, some self-compassion. And there's a process, various times I talk about this in my book, particularly the chapter on grief, which I think is chapter 9. I'll put a link to it. Yeah, no, chapter 10, ecological grief. But I want to come back to compassion, talk about compassion, about the quality of compassion. So compassion is, rather than focusing on other people's suffering, we focus on their needs, what they need to flourish, and what we can do to support them to flourish. That's the difference. Yeah? So rather than focusing on the suffering of other beings, we focus on what they need to flourish and what we can do to support them to flourish. So basically, we're focusing on the flourishing rather than the suffering. So now, of course, if we don't know this distinction, we tend to focus on the suffering, and then we tend to feel horrified anxiety. We tend to feel overwhelmed. We tend to feel despair. And of course, many environmental activists are on the point of despair, regularly visit despair. So one of the things that can support us is this clarity about what compassion is. What compassion is, it's focusing on the thriving rather than the suffering. Of course, we acknowledge the suffering. We're aware of the suffering. Yeah. So I'd like to do a meditation to finish this session with a compassion meditation. So this will take about 15-20 minutes. And in this meditation, in this guided reflection, I'll explore this difference, this distinction between focusing on the suffering and focusing on the thriving. So we'll try and do that in an experiential way, so you get a sense of it in a more reflective, meditative way. So if you want to get comfortable to sit for, as I say, 15-20 minutes. You can switch your camera off if you feel more comfortable. So take a moment to settle into your posture, whether sitting or lying down. Let the mind rest in the body. Let the mind rest in the body as the body rests on the cushion, chair, or floor. And when you're ready, coming into your heart, coming into your heart. And bringing to mind a specific instance, a specific example of your suffering, your unpleasant, painful vedanas, painful feelings in relation to the climate and ecological emergency. It might be a sense of sadness or grief or something else. Holding yourself in loving kindness with an awareness of this suffering. Sense what you're feeling right now. Is your heart heavy or contracted? And underneath this, what are you longing for? What's your heart's wish? Are you longing for peace of mind? Freedom? Understanding? Are you longing for protection of all beings, including future generations? Are you longing for compassion itself? This is self-compassion. Connecting with what we're longing for, our heart's wish. And when you're ready, bringing to mind a friend that you feel warmly towards. Holding them in your heart with loving kindness. Now bring to mind an aspect of their suffering. As you're doing this, focus on the person rather than the specific suffering. What's important to them? What do they need to live a full and satisfying life? What would help them to thrive and to flourish? When you're ready, bring to mind a being or beings who are suffering as a result of the climate and ecological emergency. This could be a person or beings that you know or ones that you've heard about. You don't need to choose a being or beings that are suffering in an extreme way. The object of this guided reflection is to nurture compassion, loving kindness with an awareness of suffering. If you find yourself feeling despondent, try returning to the first stage of self-compassion. And remember that we're not trying to develop compassion directly. So we can let go of our assumptions about what compassion is. The basic emotion is loving kindness or metta. Loving kindness towards this being or these beings with an awareness of their particular suffering. Bear in mind that there are other aspects to their experience of life. Focus on the being or beings as they go about their lives. What do they need? freedom to enjoy their lives, clean air, space to roam, nourishing food, what would support them to grow and to thrive? And if you could take a step to alleviate their particular suffering, what would it be? Vividly imagining yourself taking this step. What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it even feel like to be taking this step? When you're ready, bringing to mind someone or beings that you have difficulties with, you find difficult. Perhaps someone that you're in conflict with, or someone you avoid, or someone whose choices you see as contributing to the current climate and ecological emergency. So it doesn't need to be Ivan Bursky or Boris Johnson. Now bring to mind an aspect of their suffering. And as you're doing this, focus on the person rather than the specific suffering. And if you notice that you're experiencing Schadenfreude, or satisfaction that they're suffering, you could try going back to self-compassion or any earlier stage of the practice. So what's important to them? What do they need to live a full and satisfying life? what would help them to thrive and to flourish? And when you're ready, bringing to mind all of these people from the previous stages, all of these people or beings together in your imagination. That is yourself, the warm friend, the suffering beings, the person you struggle with. Holding all of them with loving kindness. Equally for each one, with an awareness of their suffering. And finally, radiating this equality of loving kindness with an awareness of suffering, radiating this throughout the entire universe. May all beings be happy and secure with an awareness of their suffering. May all beings be happy at heart with an awareness of their suffering. Making this wish for beings of all kinds without exception. So taking a moment to come back into the room, to open your eyes and look around. Taking in the other people on the screen. And when you're ready, switching on your camera if you're willing, if you're comfortable to do that. So we're coming towards closing. So that meditation was taken from chapter 5 of my book. It's the guided reflection at the end of chapter 5, and you can find that and the other guided reflections there in the chat. I'll also put it in the Padlet, but there it is in the chat. It's called Nurturing Compassion Towards the Environment. If you want to follow up, let me see, just get that one. If you want to follow up with my book, you can. It's in the Padlet, but I'll put the link in the chat. That's what we've been doing today. Has been taken from chapters. Chapters 4 and 5. Environmental ethics and compassionate action based on wisdom. And if you'd like to go further with this exploration, I'm running a course on the Buddhist Center online starting in May next month, doing 4 weeks in May and then 4 weeks in September to complete the 8-week course. I'll see if I can find that. I know some of you have already done the course with me, but so you might want to repeat it. But of course, this is for people who for people who want to explore the book in more detail, and also who perhaps you want to offer this course at your own centre. So, closing round. How are you doing now? What are you taking away with you from this session? So in the chat, please. So you've just got a couple of minutes to do this. And then we'll close. Shradaba and I think Alyssa have done the course. Is that right, Alyssa? No, you haven't. Okay, Alyssa hasn't. But Shradaba's done it. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciation, says Ian and Lilia. Thank you. Thank you for coming in. By nature, being really moved. Thank you. Pleased to hear that. Yes, we need to engage with our hearts really in this topic. Yeah. Susan says, love for all of us and inspiration. Oh, yeah. Christine says, thoughtful, calm, wanting to learn more, and grateful. Shantitita, gratitude and more hopeful. Pia, thank you. I found some new aspects to think about. I'm happy to hear that, Pia. Yeah. Alyssa, enjoying being on the path to being more permeable. Wow, that's an interesting word, isn't it? Permeable. Because permeable for me means something about allowing myself to be moved, allowing myself to be affected, to be touched by what I'm hearing, by my experience. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so maybe we leave it there. Okay, so I'll hand back to Shantitita. Thank you for coming this morning. Thank you.
Well, you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry. So yeah, thank you very much, Shantagaba, for a really interesting and stimulating morning. Lots to think about and digest. And I feel sort of more resourced now to go out in the world. So later today, this afternoon, I'm leading Harvesting the Gifts of the Ancestors, which some of you may have done. This is a Joanna Macy exercise. I've not done it on Zoom before, so I hope it'll work. But I'd encourage you to come. It's another way of resourcing yourself by looking back into our history and our ancestors, and harvesting the gifts they have to offer us to take out into the world. So that's at 3:30. And this evening, Shanti Gabra again. You're leading the Shambhala Warrior Puja, is that right? So look forward to that.
Yeah.